Hi, everybody. I'm Tamara Zoner.
And I'm John Davis.
Welcome to Spirit Cafe.
Come in, sit down, and
grab a cup of love.
A Spirituality Without the Guilt podcast. So the question I have to ask the world is Jenny Craig spiritual? Because, her whole diet thing, is there a spiritual diet out there? And the reason I wanted to talk to Tamara about this is because, we obviously have very different views on this because I'm huge and she's skinny as a rail. So let's so let me introduce you to my co-host today, the lovely, the beautiful, the wonderful, the person who makes me giggle every time I talk to her, Miss Tamara Zoner. Hello, Tamara. How are you?
Hello, John. I am great. I am not, however, as skinny as a rail. But yeah, this is a very interesting topic. I'm curious.
Well, yeah, as just so everyone knows, as always, I threw a loop and threw a topic she'd never even thought about, and so and I'm a total bastard that way. I will do that occasionally.
I think it's fun because I think sometimes we think best on our feet.
Well, I agree, and I think sometimes true wisdom comes out of the ethers rather than from something you've studied. And I think that one of the things we were just talking about before we went on air was the idea that I got a bunch of book learning, but you got a bunch of wisdom. So I think it's why we're a good co-host team here. Spirituality. I have studied lots and lots and lots of different kinds of spirituality, and I have delved into most of it. And I've done everything from prolonged fasts. I did a 60-day fast. I've done full vegan. I've done full carnivore. I've done every conceivable diet out there. And it's very interesting because I also studied diet and physiology. So I looked at the way we as, and anthropology, we as humans, how did our diet evolve? And then I kind of measured that with spirituality. So for me, it was a huge journey that was interesting. And every so often I'd get into a spiritual thread or go down a spiritual vein, as it were, and I would try their diet. Mm-hmm. And some of them worked and some of them didn't. And some of them were actually harmful to my body and some of them were not. So do you have any thought on this? I know that like the kosher diet, the vegan diet, and New Age spirituality is all about the vegan diet. But do you have any thoughts on diet as far as a spiritual practice?
I have, for the most part of my entire life, not dieted. So, I mean, of course, there were a couple of times when I was in college and the cabbage soup diet was all the rage. And so I tried that, but that wasn't very fun. And then
it's not. I've done it as well. Not fun.
I mean, I can make a mean cabbage soup, but that is not the way I want to make it. And then when I was married, my husband at the time, he was overweight, he had hypertension, and he's French. So the eating wasn't the healthiest, right? And I had put on a few pounds too, because the food was not the healthiest, but it was the best.
It was French.
It was so good.
Step away from the croissant.
Exactly. And so then we did try the Atkins diet together, which, then we both lost some weight. But I got to thinking about how unhealthy that really is and how it doesn't make sense to me to feed my body most of one thing and that I can eat all the fat in protein form that I want, but not, carbohydrates and breads and those things. And so I say the best diet is the one that feels good for you and you're listening to your own innate wisdom, to your own body's wisdom. So since I was 12 or 13 years old, have been thirsty. I drink a ton of water and always have, since that age. And then I just follow what feels good in my body. And of course, sometimes not, because sometimes it just tastes good. But I've gone off of gluten in the last couple of years because it doesn't do well in my body. And so I just say, okay, well, my body's just helping me align with what serves my highest good. And that's also saying goodbye 90% of the time to beef, and just always listening and noticing what's going on for my body and saying, well, this doesn't feel good and this does. And so aligning with that.
I love that answer. I love that answer. And I'll tell you why I love that answer. Because you're in the flow, you're in the spiritual flow of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite diet quotes of all time, the apostles said to Jesus, what diet should we follow? They actually asked that in the
Yeah.
Bible. What
Interesting.
diet should we follow? Because the Jewish faith had their kosher, they had all those
Right.
things that you were unclean to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus' response was perfect. He said, I would be more worried about what comes out of your mouth than what goes in it.
I love that.
Right?
Yes,
Right? Your
absolutely.
thought, words, and deeds are creating, and not what you put in your body. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, for me, when I became a vegan, I did it because I was really going down the Buddhist vein and studying. And then when I traveled through India, you go to the Swaminarayan ashram, and this ashram is really funny because it's beautiful building. You walk in, and it's divided into two sides, and one of them is like the bookstore and the learning center, the meditation center, and then on the very back is the actual ashram, which is with the temple and all the stuff. And on the left side is what I call Swaminarayan world, where you go in there and there's animatronic stories of Swaminarayan talking
Oh, no.
about how he did this, and it's like it literally is like a little Disney World of Swaminarayan, which is really kind of weird, right? But you go through this whole thing and you see all these stories of Swaminarayan, and saying that the lion didn't eat him because he had no fear. So he gave
Mhm.
the lion gave him nothing to be fearful for. And then he brought all the fish back to life that the fishermen had brought up on shore. And they all jumped back in the river, swam away. So all these stories of Swaminarayan. And then you walk into the last room of Swaminarayan world, and it's an American barnyard with a red barn and cows and goats and chickens and little signs that say, I give you milk and cheese. Why do you eat me?
Oh no.
Yeah. So you have all this guilt about you're eating these animals
So
that
much food guilt.
serve you, right?
Yeah.
And even, and in India, the interesting thing about that is everybody talks about cows being sacred in India. That's
Mhm.
not actually true. Most people think it is true, but it's not. What happened was um, they kind of think of cows as like dogs, like pets,
Oh, okay.
and what happened was one of the aspects of God. When you look at Hinduism, it's one God with many aspects of God. So you pray for, like, if I want prosperity, I go to, Lakshmi or Ganesh, right? So I pray to that aspect of God.
Mhm.
And one of their aspects of God was a guy who rode a cow. And when the British came, they saw all these statues of these guy on a cow, and then he got represented as a cow eventually, and
Okay.
so they thought it was like, oh my God, they think of the cow as God, right? Which is why they let the cows wander the streets,
Okay.
right? So that's it's not really that they worship cows; it's that there's a misinterpretation there. But this whole thing in the Swaminarayan ashram about why do you eat me is an interesting thing. So during that time, I went on a strictly vegan diet.
Okay.
Strictly vegan diet. I lost half my muscle mass, but still doing the same exercise that I was doing. I was still doing all my sword fighting shows and all my workouts. I I was constantly cold,
Mm.
and all of a sudden I had allergies that I had never had before.
Oh, goodness.
I suddenly started getting allergies like crazy, right? So I stopped that. Stopped that. And I started adding meat back in.
Mhm.
And when I added meat back in, I felt better and my muscle mass came back. So it was like, okay, so I obviously need protein. I obviously need
Right.
this.
Right.
So the more I delved into it, the more I got into natural hygienics, which is uh, you can do it in multiple ways, basically, but the basics of it is in natural hygienics, you you eat us like for before noon, you eat nothing but fruit because your body is in the elimination phase at that point, and you don't want to hinder the body, so you give it the most easy thing it can digest. And then at noon, you have a salad and one other item. And at dinner, you have a salad and one other item. And what that does is that um, when you look at protein and carbohydrate, they both take different fluids in the body to digest. And one of them's acid, one of them's alkaline. And when you put acid and alkaline together scientifically, they neutralize each other, which causes gas and bloating and all those things that we all experience. And so by eating salad and one either protein or one carbohydrate, you avoid all that process and you lose. I lost a ton of weight on that diet. And I felt great. But of course, I was running 4 miles a day, and I was riding a stationary bike for 45 minutes in the morning. So I was really also getting a lot of exercise in.
Right. But the exercise will contribute quite a bit to weight loss.
Right. So, but the interesting thing about the vegan thing was I had some of my biggest spiritual experiences on veganism. I started seeing, we often talk about in some of the other podcasts about seeing energies. I don't see the colors of auras like people always say, but I see energy flows, and I literally see energy flows. And that all started when I was vegan.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah, to me that's very interesting too. But it continues now.
Okay. Now, maybe you just had to activate a part of your brain. See, this is so interesting because I did do a spiritual journey with a shaman once, and she had us, she had us prepare for it by restricting our diets. And so over the course of a couple of weeks, we were supposed to not eat red meat, not have alcohol, even if we were taking certain medications, if it was safe to go off of them. She said, go off of them because they block the pineal gland, and that third eye. And so within a couple of days of the event, you basically go on a liquid diet. So you can puree things and drink it, but no solids. And I don't know what the difference would have been had I not followed it. I followed it for the most part. But like usual, I wasn't religious about it. So
you don't get religious about anything, do you?
No, listen to myself before I listen to anybody else. Because
you're religious in your wine drinking. That's what you're religious about.
Well, she said I could have the red wine.
well, there you go. Well,
I didn't have that a couple of days.
Even the Catholics wouldn't give up the booze. You
right?
know what I'm saying?
Well, and it was a couple of days before Thanksgiving. I mean, or a couple of days after Thanksgiving. Okay. And so I had to be on that restriction during a holiday.
You did that with leftovers in the fridge? What the hell?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
And I made this amazing butternut squash soup with I think I put a sweet potato in it and a bunch of herbs, and it was amazing. Lots of garlic.
You're horrible.
And it was good.
I'm hungry now.
I know. And so maybe that helped, but I don't know. Yeah, and I definitely had a journey, and I'm trying to remember, I did that journey 3 times. And the thing that made the biggest difference for me was not what I did or didn't eat. It was who was in the room with me.
Right.
One time I did it with a room full of women I'd never met, or 1 or 2 that I had. Once I did it with just my brother and the shaman and me. And that was the best experience, the best, most amazing spiritual experience of my life. And then the next time I did it in a room full of a mixed match, people I knew and people I didn't. And it was so noisy. It was hard to focus. So I don't think the food had anything to do with it.
No, right.
But it's interesting that you started seeing auras after really cleansing your inner palate, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a cleansing. Before that, I grew up in a beach resort. We had cotton candy and carameled corn and all the junk that you find at a beach resort is all there, right?
Sure.
And I was a kid. In my teen years, you're out eating all the junk all the time, right? All the junk all the time.
Well, and I was just talking about this with someone else. Our parents are of this generation of convenience where, my mother's mom worked in the Chef Boyardee factory. So canned food was the way to go because it was easy and quick. And, my mom, bless her heart, did not even know, and this is a farmer's wife, didn't even know what a real bulb of garlic looked like.
Really?
Until I started cooking, after I went away to college, and was like, Mom, this is garlic, not that powder crap in your cupboard. So, you know, I think we've grown up on convenience food for the most part. And I feel like this whole trend of different diets, of veganism, of being more conscious of the food that you eat and about the sustainability and about the treatment of animals is really just one more call back to ourselves to listen to our own intuition about what's right and what's wrong for our bodies, hearts, minds, and souls.
I completely agree with you. Could not agree more. I did a 60-day juice fast one time because I was really into the idea of an inner cleanse, cleaning all the crap out of my body. And I
Mhm.
thought, well, that'd be the great thing to do, just a 60-day juice fast. And so I did it.
Man, that seems like a long time for
You
nothing
know
but
what?
juice.
After day 3, you don't it's not bad.
Does
Day
red wine count as juice?
what'd you say?
Does red wine count as juice?
No. But I was doing Renaissance festivals, and I was doing
Man.
four sword fighting shows a day, and I felt great. I felt wonderful. My skin was clear,
Mhm.
and then I slowly started getting cold, and I
Mm.
mean cold in the middle of friggin' summer. I was cold. I was wearing a sweater, and it was 80 degrees outside
Wow.
because I was just cold all the time. And by the end of that, I was like, okay, I got to break it. So let me try something. So I, I started with grains. I added grains. Instantly, I had joint pains, and all of that stuff came in. All the stuff that never bothered me before
Hmm.
bothered me a lot now because
Wow.
I had cleaned out everything, and it was very interesting. Um, and then when I started eating meat again, I felt better. And it's for me, once again, it goes back to that meat thing.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, I was still meditating every day. I was doing all these things, and I was trying all these diets, and I had some pretty good sized health scares, pretty good sized ones. I had they thought I had a blood clot in my leg, then they thought that a blood clot in my lung, then they thought I was having congestive heart failure. All of them were wrong, by the way.
Yeah.
They thought I had something wrong with my pancreas, and then they also thought that I at that same time they had found spots in my lungs, and they were like, we don't know what that is, right? And so I was going through a whole bunch of crazy stuff. So I changed my diet and did all that stuff, and it all got worse,
Oh, wow.
right? When I took meat and everything out of the diet. So I said, well, if that's not where, and the nutritionist is telling me to do exactly what I'm doing. And when I stopped listening to the nutritionist and I went the other way, and I went hardcore the other way, I went on the carnivore diet.
Okay.
I ate nothing but meat and eggs and cheese, right? You know what happened? I lost 70 pounds.
Oh my God.
My eyes turned from brown to green. All of my joint pain went away. All my spots in my lungs went away. All of my issues that I had with gluten went away,
Wow.
and everything went away. And here I am eating I ate a ton of meat, right? Now I'm at a point where I'm scaling that back, and what I'm doing now is I'm bringing salads in, and I'm
Mhm.
adding some of that just for the the fiber. But for me, the clarity of mind, which to me is an important part of spirituality, is the clarity of mind.
Absolutely.
And the clarity of mind that I attained during that time was hugely impactful. And even more so, the serenity of self. That's the
Mm.
best way I can say it. I was more calm than I had been in years by eating nothing but this meat. Now, once again, earlier on, I said on my spiritual journey of veganism, I lost weight. I was pained. So I think spirituality, as we said, is a personal journey. And I think that for each one of us, we need to find what works for us. Like
Mhm.
I limit the gluten in my body. My brother has celiac disease, right?
Okay.
So I limit the gluten in my body because I know that if I eat too much gluten, my joints start to hurt.
Yes,
So,
that was one of the first things I noticed when I went off of gluten for my stomach issues. And it was basically a test. Like I don't have celiacs, but the doctor said, well, if you've noticed before that you have relief without it, then go ahead and go off of it, but go off all the way for 4 months to really
right.
see if it makes a difference. And within a couple of weeks, I noticed how much better my joints felt, which was
Mm,
so strange because before that I was thinking, good Lord, do I have fibromyalgia or what? Like my body just aches. And it doesn't off of gluten. It's so interesting.
um, it is interesting because when in spirituality, we are not only our spiritual self, but our physical body is an aspect of self.
Hmm.
And if our body is physically saying this is harmful for you,
Hmm.
then isn't it truly spiritual to take the harmful things out of your life?
Absolutely, because I think we've talked about this, the this piece of spirituality that we're all trying to get to is really tuning in to our own higher wisdom. And so our body is sharing its wisdom with us for
Right,
what that is.
right. And for me, when in India, when that cows, why do you eat me? Right? Why do you eat me? One of my favorite things in the world is a good steak. I love a steak. It's great. It's wonderful. And I think about that sign every so often, and I'm like, so why are they trying to say that their spirituality is correct? Now, let me for those who are listening to this podcast, I'm not telling you to follow anything that I do, and I'm sure Tamara's not telling you to follow
Not
anything
at
she
all.
does either. Your spirituality is a personal journey, but let me throw some scientific dietary history in here just to give you something interesting to ponder.
All right.
Okay, so there's cave art from over 1 million years ago of humans hunting, killing, and eating animals, right?
Hmm.
That is 90,000 years before Egypt became an agrarian society. 90,000 years before
Hmm.
that. Anthropologists know that had it not been for animal fat, our brain could not have become the brain it is
Right.
to evolve. So
Hmm.
we had to actually eat the animals to get to where we are in this hierarchy of life, in a hierarchy of physical life. Um, After Egypt became an agrarian society and started eating the grains and having all that going on, 90% of the illness and tooth decay that we live with in the modern world is prevalent in bone from Egypt afterwards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. All of this eating of grains and all that stuff actually, when they look at it scientifically, is a detriment to our society, health wise. And so when I look at like your situation with being gluten intolerant,
Hmm.
my situation with having sensitive to gluten, my brother being celiac disease, the book Wheat Belly and all these books that are out there that talk about this idea, and they talk about GMOs and the how
Hmm.
wheat in the 50s was 3 times taller and half the yield. Now it's half the size and 3 times the yield, and it's like all that kind of stuff. It to me, it's really interesting because when I look at the scientific evolution of diet and the human animal, it it changes my perspective on the spiritual aspect of it because one of the documentaries I saw, and I can't remember the name of the documentary, the guy he said everything I just told you.
Hmm.
He says, let me show you on a much more visceral scale. And they went out to a football field and they started at one end of the football field and they started walking. He says, this football field is the timeline of human history. We know that we were back here, we started. And he starts walking. And then he gets to the 50-yard line. He says, this is where we find cave art of people hunting, killing, and eating animals. And then he keeps on walking and he keeps on walking. And he gets down to the last yard on the football field. And he says, this is where we start to see evidence of people eating other things, eating grains and things like that. And then he goes on further and he gets down to the last like half foot. He says, this is where Egypt took agrarian society to high form. Mm-hmm. So now you're down to the last 6 inches of a 300-yard football field.
Right.
He says, and from here forward, this last 6 inches of this 300 yards is where 90% of the disease is found in bone.
Wow.
All right. So it's like, that's crazy, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess the question is anthropologically, we are meat eaters, according to him, according to that science. So a lot of the spiritual belief says we're not. They actually literally say we're not supposed to eat meat, right? I personally believe we're omnivorous. We eat everything.
Sure, of course. That's absolutely
right. And I think that when you, just like anything, just like religion, if you go all in on one and not accept it all, then you're kind of losing the point, and you're kind of going to throw yourself off a cliff into someplace pretty negative, really.
Right. Yeah. I still feel like the eclectic version of life is the best one.
Right.
Taking what really works for you and leaving off the rest.
Right. I love the perspective, because it really comes back to that idea that spirituality is a personal journey. Mm-hmm. And if it's truly a personal journey, then what you find works for you is right.
Yes.
What you find works for you is your spiritual journey.
Absolutely.
And when I look at I look at a lot of the dietary rules of religion as just another dogma. Mm-hmm. It's literally just a thing you have to follow to be in our club, you know?
Right. And maybe really the whole point of all of it is it's just one more sort of challenge of getting comfortable with making choices for yourself and not simply following someone else's rules.
Right.
They just made them up, people.
Right. And what's interesting is they made them up because of very specific things, right? Like they didn't understand bacteria, and pigs were unclean because they dwelled in the mud and the gook, and you got diseases when you ate them because you didn't clean them right. So, that we can't eat that because that's unclean. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's unclean because you didn't clean it right.
Right, you didn't clean it right. You didn't wash your hands when you served it. You right.
Exactly, and the Bible. The Bible's interesting because there's never a place in there where it says literally Jesus ate meat, right? Okay. But we know he ate fish, and we know he created fish. The loaves and the fishes, right?
Right.
But there's also all these other Jewish meals that he went to. And the number one staple of a Jewish meal is lamb, right? And he's considered the shepherd. Well, what do you think they're doing with those sheep, right? Besides the clothing, but
we're just making sweaters, folks.
Right. So I find it interesting. I think the topic of diet and spirituality is interesting because it really comes down to just another dogma in my mind. And if it works for you, then I'm excited for you. I'm excited for you because working for whatever you're doing, if it's working for you, then that is your spiritual journey.
Right. And if it's actually working for you.
Right.
So pizza every night, while delicious, is not working for us. That is not, you have to really, at least from my perspective, tune in, not just to what you like to taste, but what feels good in your body. Do you have more energy because of the food you're eating? Do you have more clarity of mind because of the food you're eating and what you're drinking? Or are you numbing yourself down? Right. And that is going to be different, in my opinion, for everyone. And so it's so vital to tune into what truly works for you.
That being said, a good slice of pizza is a transcendental experience.
Oh, God, I agree. When I do my conscious gluten cheats, it's usually when I'm making my own homemade pizza.
Yeah.
Homemade dough, double rise, homemade
Oh,
sauce, lots of veggies, and goodness. Yes. So that
yeah.
it's worth a cheat. It's worth a few days or a week, even
Right.
sometimes, which is why it's
That's
only
great.
once or twice a year. So,
Well, that's awesome. For me, my best friend owns a pizza shop. So it's funny because we have pizza here locally, and none of them are as good as his. So when
sure.
I go back to Rehoboth, it's like we don't eat pizza for months beforehand because we're about to have Louis Pizza. So we're like, no way in hell we're going to have anything else but that. So, well, that's just been a good topic, and it looks like we're coming up on a half an hour.
All right. Well, thanks for bringing this up, John. It was interesting to see where it led us and how it took us really back to that ultimate spiritual experience that we may be experiencing or seeking. So thank you for listening, my friends. Thank you, John Davis, for another exciting Spirit Cafe episode. And I'm really hungry now, so let's call it a day.
Yeah. Me too. All right. All right. Thank you for joining us at Spirit Cafe, a place where you can safely explore your spirituality without the guilt or dogma of religion. Leave all comments and suggestions on the Spirit Cafe podcast Facebook page.